The worst maritime disaster in American history did not happen at sea. It happened on a river, 7 miles north of Memphis, in the dark, at 2 o'clock in the morning. More people died on the Sultana than died on the Titanic. And almost nobody has heard of it. To understand why, you have to understand what week it was. The American Civil War had just ended. Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox on the 9th of April, 1865. 5 days later, Abraham Lincoln was shot in a theater in Washington. He died the following morning. And on the 26th of April, John Wilkes Booth was cornered in a Virginia tobacco barn and killed. The Sultana exploded the next night. Every newspaper in the country was full of Booth. There was no room left for a steamboat. The Sultana was a sidewheel paddle steamer, built in Cincinnati in 1863. She was about 260 feet long, wooden-hulled, and she ran the Mississippi between St. Louis and New Orleans. Her legal capacity was 376 people. That figure included her crew. On the night she died, she was carrying somewhere close to 2,100. That is not a rounding error. That is nearly 6 times what the boat was licensed to hold. To understand how that happened, you have to follow the money. When the war ended, the Union Army had a problem. Thousands of its soldiers were sitting in Confederate prison camps in the Deep South, and they had to be brought home. The 2 worst camps were Andersonville in Georgia and Cahaba in Alabama. Men came out of them weighing under 100 pounds. Skeletal. Sick. Many could barely walk. They were gathered at a parole camp outside Vicksburg, Mississippi, and there they waited for boats north. The government paid private steamboat companies to carry them. $5 a head for an enlisted man. $10 for an officer. Do the arithmetic on 2,000 men and you can see the shape of the problem immediately. A full boat was a fortune. An empty boat was nothing. And so at Vicksburg there was competition, and where there is competition for a government contract, there are usually bribes. The Sultana's captain was a man named James Cass Mason. He had a financial stake in the boat, and he needed the money. There were other steamers tied up at Vicksburg that night. The Pauline Carroll, the Lady Gay. They left nearly empty. Every available prisoner was put onto the Sultana instead. The officer in charge of loading, Captain Frederick Speed, later said he had been told the number was around 1,300. It was not 1,300. But the overcrowding is only half of the story. The other half is a piece of metal about 26 inches wide. The Sultana had 4 tubular boilers. On the way up to Vicksburg, one of them began to leak. A Vicksburg boilermaker named R.G. Taylor was called to look at it. He found a bulge in the boiler plate. The metal had swollen outward under pressure. His recommendation was straightforward. Cut the damaged sheet out. Replace it properly. That would take several days. Several days would mean losing the prisoners, and the prisoners were the money. So a compromise was made. Instead of replacing the plate, a patch was riveted over the bulge. And the patch was made of thinner steel than the plate it was covering. Taylor said afterwards that he had objected. He patched it anyway, and the Sultana steamed north. There was one more factor, and it was the river itself. It was spring. Snowmelt had come down from the north and the Mississippi was in heavy flood. In places the water was 3 miles wide, spilling out over the farmland on either bank. The current was ferocious, and pushing a loaded steamboat upstream against it meant working the boilers hard, for hours, without relief. At Helena, Arkansas, a photographer set up on the bank to take a picture of the extraordinary crowd on the boat. The men surged to one side to be in the photograph, and the Sultana listed so badly that she nearly went over. That photograph still exists. You can see them, packed shoulder to shoulder across every deck, going home. Most of the men in it had less than 2 days to live. The boat reached Memphis on the evening of the 26th of April and unloaded a cargo of sugar. Then she crossed to the Arkansas side to take on coal, and at about midnight she pushed back out into the current. At around 2 in the morning, 7 miles above Memphis, 3 of the 4 boilers exploded. The blast tore the center out of the boat. It destroyed the pilot house. It brought down one of the tall smokestacks onto the crowded deck below. Men who had survived Andersonville were killed in their sleep by falling iron. Superheated steam went through the packed decks, and scalding is a particular kind of death. Many of those men never got into the water at all. Then the wreck caught fire. The Sultana was wooden, and she burned quickly and completely. The survivors had 2 choices, and neither was good. Stay on a burning boat, or go into a flooded river in the dark. Most of them could not swim. Almost none of them had the strength left to try. They went in anyway, hundreds at a time, and they pulled each other under. The water was cold and the current carried them downstream past Memphis in the dark. Some of them were still floating when the sun came up, 7 or 8 miles further down. Others had been swept sideways into the flooded woods and were found clinging in the tops of submerged trees. The first rescue boat, the steamer Bostona II, came on the wreck about an hour after the explosion and began pulling men out. The Arkansas, the Jenny Lind, the Essex, and the gunboat Tyler followed. They saved perhaps 500 people. Many of those 500 died in Memphis hospitals over the following days, from burns, from scalding, from exhaustion. The official death toll, set later by the United States Customs Service, was 1,168. Some historians put the real figure closer to 1,700. Nobody knows, because nobody ever had an accurate list of who boarded. Now the part that should make you angry. There were 3 separate investigations. Exactly 1 man was ever convicted, and that was Captain Frederick Speed, the officer who signed off on the loading. His conviction was reviewed by the Judge Advocate General of the Army and overturned. Lieutenant Colonel Reuben Hatch, the quartermaster at Vicksburg whose name comes up repeatedly in the bribery allegations, simply ignored the summons to testify and was never compelled to appear. Captain Mason of the Sultana was not prosecuted, for the simple reason that he had died with his boat. And that is the whole of the accountability. 1 overturned conviction. There is a last detail, and it is a strange one. The Mississippi does not stay in one place. Over the following century the river moved. In 1982, an expedition led by a Memphis lawyer named Jerry Potter went looking for the wreck. They found charred wooden timbers about 32 feet down, under a soybean field in Arkansas, roughly 2 miles from where the river runs today. The worst maritime disaster in American history is buried under a farm. 1,100 men, at minimum, who had survived a war and survived the prison camps, and who died 400 miles from home because a patch was cheaper than a plate.